The kitchen fires had burned low, casting long shadows across the stone floor where Lila Wildfire knelt scrubbing grease from the flagstones. Her hands were raw, the skin cracked and bleeding in places where the lye soap had eaten through, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The head cook would check her work before dawn, and any imperfection would mean another day without food. 5 years. 5 years she had lived like this, hiding in plain sight among the thornwood pack, her true name buried so deep she sometimes forgot it herself. The last daughter of the Wildfire bloodline, reduced to a kitchen servant with ash in her hair and burns on her forearms. Her parents' screams still echoed in her nightmares. The night the hunters had come, the night her mother had shoved her into a hidden cellar and whispered, "Survive," before the flames took everything. She had survived. But some days, Lila wondered if survival was really living at all. "Just keep your head down," she told herself, pressing harder against a stubborn stain. "Another year, maybe two, and you'll have saved enough to leave, to find a pack that doesn't know your face, where you can start over." But even as she thought it, her hand drifted unconsciously to her stomach, and ice spread through her veins. She was pregnant. The realization had come 3 weeks ago, when the nausea she'd attributed to spoiled meat hadn't faded, when her monthly blood hadn't come, when she'd caught her own scent and found it changed. Sweeter, richer, unmistakably fertile. And she knew exactly when it had happened. Marcus, the traveling wolf with kind eyes and gentle hands who had passed through Thornwood 2 months ago. He'd found her crying behind the stables after the beta's son had cornered her, had wiped her tears and spoken to her like she was a person, not a piece of furniture. One night. One desperate, foolish night where she'd let herself believe someone could want her, could see her, could maybe even love her. He'd promised to return for her. He never had. She'd learned later, through whispered rumors at a border tavern, that a traveling wolf matching his description had been found dead on the road to Thornwood, throat torn out, the kill bearing the marks of the purest cult. They'd been hunting anyone who got close to her, even without knowing why. Stupid, Lila thought viciously, scrubbing until her knuckles ached. Stupid, naive, pathetic. You knew better. You know wolves like you don't get happy endings. But the child growing inside her didn't care about her self-recrimination. It was real, and it was growing, and soon there would be no hiding it. The kitchen door slammed open, and Lila flinched so hard she knocked over her bucket of dirty water. Gray, soapy liquid spread across the stones she'd just cleaned, and her heart seized with panic as heavy boots approached. "Well, well." Beta Corwin's voice dripped with contempt as he surveyed the mess. "Look at the little kitchen mouse, making a disaster as always." Lila kept her head bowed, her wolf, dormant for so long she sometimes forgot she had one, stirring uneasily in her chest. "Forgive me, Beta. I'll clean it immediately." "You'll do more than that." His boot connected with her bucket, sending it clattering across the floor. "Look at me when I speak to you, servant." Slowly, Lila raised her eyes. Beta Corwin was a thick-necked man with small, cruel eyes and a mouth that seemed designed for sneering. He'd never liked her, had always sensed something about her that made him suspicious, though he'd never been able to identify what. Now, though, his nostrils flared and something shifted in his expression, something that made Lila's blood run cold. "Stand up," he ordered. She obeyed, her legs trembling beneath her rough-spun skirt. The motion made her dizzy. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, but she forced herself to stay upright as the beta circled her like a predator examining prey. "There's something different about you." His voice was silk over steel. "Something changed." "No. No, no, no. I don't know what you mean, Beta." The words came out steady, a small miracle. "I've been working the same shifts, sleeping in the same—" "Don't lie to me." He grabbed her chin, forcing her head up, and inhaled deeply. His eyes widened, then narrowed with savage satisfaction. You're breeding. Heat flared in Lila's palms, a sudden, inexplicable warmth that made her fingers tingle. She clenched her fists, hiding them in her skirts, terrified of what it might mean. The word hit her like a physical blow. Please. Who? His grip tightened until she gasped. Who mounted you, kitchen mouse? Who dared to rut with pack property without permission? Pack property, as if she were a broodmare, a thing to be used and discarded. A traveler, she whispered, because there was no point in lying now. He passed through 2 months ago. He's gone. Gone. Beta Corwin released her with a shove that sent her stumbling backward. So you spread your legs for some rootless wanderer, got yourself pupped, and now you think you can hide it? Think you can birth some bastard under our roof, eating our food, taking our resources? Lila's hand moved protectively to her stomach before she could stop it. I'll work harder. I'll earn my keep. You'll do nothing. The beta's smile was terrible. Except serve as an example. He grabbed her arm and dragged her toward the door. Lila struggled, panic overriding years of careful submission, but he was 3 times her size and fed properly, while she was half-starved and exhausted. Beta, please. She dug her heels in, but the stone floor offered no purchase. Please, I've served loyally for 5 years. I've never caused trouble. You've caused nothing but trouble. He hauled her through the kitchen, past the other servants who averted their eyes, through the great hall where pack members lounged before the fire. From the moment you arrived with those sad eyes and that pitiful story, I knew you were wrong. Knew you'd bring shame on this pack. The great doors opened onto a world of white. Winter had come early to the Thornwood territory, and snow lay thick across the ground, still falling in fat, lazy flakes. The cold hit Lila like a wall, stealing her breath, biting through her thin servant's dress as if it were made of paper. No. The word came out as a sob. No, you can't. Watch me. Beta Corwin shoved her down the stairs and she fell hard, crying out as her elbow cracked against frozen stone. You're tainted goods now, kitchen mouse. No wolf with any pride would take you. No pack would want a used-up servant carrying another male's bastard. Lila pushed herself up, tasting blood where she'd bitten her tongue. Around her, she could see pack members emerging from the hall, drawn by the commotion. Some looked uncomfortable. Most looked away. None stepped forward to help. Because I'm nobody, she thought numbly. Because I've spent 5 years making sure I was invisible, and now that invisibility is killing me. Please. She hated the pleading in her voice, hated herself for begging, but the cold was already seeping into her bones, and her baby, her innocent, unwanted baby, had done nothing to deserve death. At least let me gather my things. My wages. You have no things. You have no wages. Beta Corwin descended the stairs until he loomed over her, his shadow blocking out the gray winter light. Everything you are belongs to this pack, and this pack is casting you out. Now run, little mouse. He leaned close, his breath hot against her frozen cheek. Run, and maybe you'll make it to the territory border before the cold takes you. Though I doubt it. He straightened, raised his voice so all could hear. Let it be known that the Thornwood Pack does not harbor whores or their bastard offspring. Any wolf who aids this exile will share her fate. Then he turned and walked back into the warmth, and the doors slammed shut behind him, and Lila was alone in the snow. For a long moment she couldn't move, couldn't think. The cold was a living thing, crawling up her bare arms, sinking teeth into her exposed skin. She was going to die out here. She was going to die, and her baby was going to die, and no one would ever know that the last wildfire had perished in a snowbank outside a kitchen door. No. The thought came from somewhere deep, somewhere she'd thought was dead. Her wolf, that tiny, traumatized creature that had gone silent the night her family burned, stirred in her chest. No. We will not die here. We will not let them win. Lila pushed herself to her feet. Her whole body shook, and her elbows screamed with every movement, but she forced herself upright. Forced herself to take one step, then another. The border. The beta had said the border. She didn't know what lay beyond Thornwood territory. Didn't know if the neighboring pack would be any kinder than this one, but she knew that standing still meant death, and she had not survived her family's massacre, had not endured 5 years of abuse and starvation, had not grown this tiny, precious life inside her just to give up now. So she walked. The snow came up past her ankles, soaking through her thin shoes within minutes. Her feet went numb first, then her fingers, then her ears. The cold was a physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders, trying to drive her to her knees. Keep moving, she told herself. Keep moving. Just one more step. One more. Asterisk. She lost track of time. The world became a white blur. Trees looming out of the snow like ghosts. The ground treacherous with hidden roots and frozen streams. Once, she fell and lay in the snow for what felt like hours, staring up at the gray sky, wondering if it would be so bad to just close her eyes. Just for a moment. But then she felt it. A tiny flutter in her belly, barely there, like a butterfly testing its wings. Her baby. Moving. Okay, she whispered, her voice cracked and raw. Okay, I'm getting up. I'm getting up. She got up. The border came without warning, a subtle shift in the scent of the air, a feeling of crossing some invisible threshold. Thornwood territory ended. New territory began. And with that realization came a surge of desperate hope that gave her just enough strength to take another step. Her foot caught on something, a root, a rock, she never knew, and she fell. This time, she didn't get up. The snow was soft beneath her cheek, almost warm compared to the ice in her veins. She could feel her heartbeat slowing, could feel the world growing distant and dim. Somewhere far away she heard voices, but they seemed like a dream. I tried, she thought, one hand curling protectively around her belly. I tried, little one. I'm sorry. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was a pair of boots in the snow, and a voice that sounded like thunder and honey saying, "Get the king, now." Lila woke to warmth. For a long, disoriented moment, she couldn't process it. Warmth was something that happened to other people. People who weren't kitchen servants, people who weren't exiles bleeding out in the snow. But the sensation was undeniable. Soft blankets wrapped around her body, a fire crackling somewhere nearby, the smell of wood smoke and something else. Something wild and green, like pine forests after rain. She opened her eyes. The room was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. Dark wood paneling, tapestries depicting wolves running through autumn forests, a fireplace tall enough to stand in, currently blazing with flames that painted everything in shades of gold. The bed beneath her was impossibly soft, the sheets finer than anything she'd ever touched. I'm dead, she thought hazily. I'm dead. And this is some kind of afterlife for wolves who didn't deserve heaven but weren't quite bad enough for hell. You're not dead. The voice came from the shadows by the door, deep and rough-edged, and Lila's heart stopped. He stepped into the firelight, and she understood immediately why they called him the Alpha King. Cale Valewood was massive, easily the largest wolf she'd ever seen, even in human form. Broad shoulders, powerful arms, a face that looked carved from stone and storm clouds. His hair was dark, falling across a forehead creased with something that might have been concern, and his eyes. His eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. He took another step forward, and Lila saw his nostrils flare, saw something flicker across his expression that she couldn't identify. His hands, hanging at his sides, curled into fists. My patrol found you in the snow, he said, and his voice was rougher now, strained. You were nearly dead. The healers weren't sure you would. He stopped abruptly, jaw tightening. Lila's hand flew to her stomach, panic surging through her. My baby is fine. He took another step, then stopped, as if physically forcing himself not to come closer. The child is strong, stronger than it should be, given what you endured. Relief flooded through her, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. Her baby was alive. Somehow, impossibly, her baby had survived. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you, Their eyes met. Later, Lila would try to describe what happened in that moment, and she would never find the right words. It was like being struck by lightning and set on fire at the same time. Heat exploded through her body, starting in her chest and spreading outward until every nerve ending was alive and screaming. Her wolf, silent for so long, buried so deep, surged up with a force that made her gasp, howling a single word that echoed through her entire being: mate. Across the room, the Alpha King's eyes flooded with liquid gold. A growl tore from his chest, not threatening, something else entirely. Something primal and possessive and desperately hungry. His hands shook as he took another step toward her, then another, moving as if pulled by invisible chains. Impossible, he breathed, and his voice was wrecked, barely recognizable. You carry another's child, yet the bond. He stopped at the edge of her bed, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell that intoxicating scent, wild and elemental, like standing in a forest during a thunderstorm, and something darker, something that made her wolf whine with need. How is this possible? Lila couldn't answer, could barely think. The bond between them was a living thing, wrapping around her heart like chains of shimmering light, terrifying and undeniable. She should be afraid. She was afraid. But beneath the fear was something else. Something that felt, impossibly, like coming home. I don't... Her voice cracked. I don't understand. Neither do I. His hand rose, trembling visibly, reaching toward her face as if drawn by a force beyond his control. I have waited my entire life for my mate. Searched every pack, every territory, every corner of this world. And now... His fingers brushed her cheek, and electricity shot through her, making them both inhale sharply. Now I find you bleeding in my snow, carrying another wolf's child, and my soul recognizes you anyway. Tears were falling now, tracing hot paths down her cold cheeks. I'm no one, she whispered. I'm just a kitchen servant. I'm nothing. The Alpha King's eyes flared gold again, and this time his growl held an edge of anger, but not at her. You are not nothing. You are mine. The word settled into her bones like a brand, like a promise, like a threat. And for the first time in 5 years, Lila Wildfire felt her wolf lift its head and howl. The word hung in the air between them, vibrating with a power that seemed to reshape the very fabric of reality. Mine. Lila's wolf howled again, a sound of pure recognition that echoed through her bones, and she found herself unable to look away from the Alpha King's golden eyes. Kale's hand still rested against her cheek, his touch impossibly gentle for a wolf of his size and reputation. The warmth of his palm seeped into her skin, chasing away the lingering cold that had settled so deep she'd thought she'd never be warm again. Through that single point of contact, she could feel something else, a current of energy that pulsed between them like a second heartbeat, growing stronger with every passing second. I can feel you, he murmured, wonder threading through his rough voice. Your heartbeat, your fear, your confusion. His thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone, and Lila shivered. Not from cold this time. The bond is already forming, even incomplete. Even unmarked, I can feel you in my chest like a second heart. Lila's breath came in short, shallow gasps. Her wolf was prowling beneath her skin, restless and desperate, straining toward this male with an intensity that terrified her. For 5 years, that wolf had been silent, a wounded creature hiding in the depths of her soul, too traumatized to surface. Now it was wide awake, and it wanted. "This is impossible," she whispered, echoing his earlier words. "Fated mates don't. The bond shouldn't. I'm pregnant with another wolf's child." Pain flickered across Kale's features, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. But she felt it through the nascent bond, a sharp ache that matched her own. "The moon goddess doesn't make mistakes," he said, his voice rough. "If she has declared you my mate, then there is a reason. The child you carry doesn't change what you are to me. And what am I to you?" The question came out before she could stop it, raw and vulnerable in a way she hated. A kitchen servant? An exile? A woman stupid enough to trust a wolf who promised to return and never did? Kale's growl rumbled through the room, vibrating in her chest. "You are my mate." The word carried the weight of mountains, the force of storms. "You are the other half of my soul, the wolf I have searched for across centuries. Whatever you were before, whatever they made you believe you were, is nothing compared to what you are now." His hand slid from her cheek to cup the back of her neck, and Lila felt her wolf roll over in submission, baring its throat in a gesture that was as instinctive as breathing. The sensation was foreign, terrifying. She had never submitted to anyone, not truly, not in her heart. She had bowed and scraped and played the part of a servant, but inside she had always been resisting, always been surviving. This was different. This was her wolf recognizing its match, its equal, its home. "I can feel your fear," Kale said softly, his golden eyes searching her face. "You don't trust me. You don't trust anyone." It wasn't a question. "Someone hurt you, and not just the pack that threw you into the snow." Lila's throat tightened. The fire crackled in the silence, casting dancing shadows across the walls, and she found herself unable to lie. The bond between them was too new, too raw. It demanded honesty even as it terrified her. "My family was killed when I was 12, she heard herself say. "Hunters came in the night. They burned our home, slaughtered everyone, my parents, my brothers, our entire pack. I survived because my mother hid me in a cellar beneath the kitchen." The words came out flat, emotionless, recited by rote. She had told this story before, though never the whole truth. "I've been hiding ever since, changing my name, moving from pack to pack, trying to stay invisible." "Your real name," Kyle said, and it wasn't quite a question. "Lila is not the name your mother gave you." She hesitated, old habits warring with this new, terrifying connection. But the bond pulsed between them, warm and insistent, and her wolf whined at the thought of lying to its mate. "Lila is my real name," she admitted. "But my surname, the one I've been using, is not mine. I've been hiding behind borrowed identities for so long I almost forgot." "Forgot what?" The words stuck in her throat. She had buried this truth so deep, had worked so hard to erase every trace of her heritage, that speaking it aloud felt like stepping off a cliff. But Kale's hand was warm on her neck, and his eyes were patient, and through the bond she could feel his genuine desire to know her, not the servant, not the survivor, but her. "My name is Lila Wildfire," she whispered, last daughter of the Wildfire bloodline. Kale went utterly still. For a long, terrible moment, Lila thought she had made a fatal mistake. The Wildfire name meant something. Even she knew that, though the details had been kept from her. Her mother had made her promise never to speak it, had warned her that there were wolves who would kill her just for existing. And now she had handed this truth to a male she had known for mere minutes, a king with the power to do anything he wanted with her. Stupid, she thought desperately. Stupid, stupid. The bond made you careless. Wildfire, Kale breathed, and his voice was strange, layered with emotions she couldn't parse. The royal bloodline, the wolves of golden flame. Lila's blood ran cold. You know what I am. I know what you were meant to be. His hand tightened on her neck, not painfully, but possessively, as if he was afraid she might disappear. The prophecy, the one spoken by the oracle of the first pack 3 centuries ago, carved into the sacred stones beneath the full moon. When the last wildfire queen takes her rightful mate, she will birth wolves of unprecedented power, and the fractured packs shall become one. His voice dropped. Your bloodline was massacred because... He stopped, his expression shifting to something darker. Because someone feared that prophecy. I don't know anything about a prophecy, Lila said quickly. My mother never told me. I was just a child. I know. Kale's voice softened and his thumb traced soothing circles on the sensitive skin behind her ear. I'm not accusing you of anything, little wolf. I'm trying to understand how the moon goddess has woven our fates together. Lila's wolf preened at the endearment, even as her human mind recoiled from it. She wasn't little. She had survived things that would have broken stronger wolves. But there was something about the way he said it, something protective rather than dismissive, that made her chest ache with an emotion she couldn't name. I should go, she said, though even as the words left her mouth, she knew they were absurd. She was barely conscious, heavy with child, wearing nothing but a thin nightgown that didn't belong to her. Where exactly was she planning to go? You should rest. Kale's voice brooked no argument. Your body has been through tremendous trauma. The healers said you were on the edge of death when my patrol found you. Another hour in that snow, and we would have lost you both. The reminder of how close she had come to dying, how close her baby had come to dying, sent a shudder through Lila's body. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach, and she felt the familiar flutter of movement beneath her palm. My baby, she said, her voice cracking. They said, you said, but are you sure? I'm sure. Kale's hand covered hers on her belly, and the contact sent a jolt of heat through her entire body. The child's heartbeat is strong, stronger than it should be, given the circumstances. Our healer believes there may be some of your wildfire magic protecting it, your bloodline's gift for survival. Magic. Lila had never thought of herself as magical. Her wolf had been silent for so long, her powers, if she'd ever had any, dormant since childhood. But she remembered her mother's hands glowing golden when she healed, remembered her father's eyes blazing with flame when he fought to protect their pack. Maybe some part of that legacy lived on in her, even if she'd never been able to access it. I don't understand any of this, she admitted, exhaustion pulling at her bones. An hour ago, I was dying in the snow. Now you're telling me I'm your fated mate, and my bloodline has some prophecy attached to it, and my baby has magic. Her voice broke. It's too much. It's all too much. Kale's expression softened in a way that seemed to surprise even him. Then don't try to understand it all tonight. He released her gently, stepping back from the bed with what appeared to be tremendous effort. Rest. Heal. There will be time for explanations later. He moved toward the door, and Lila felt the bond stretch between them like a rubber band pulled too tight. Her wolf whined in protest, and she had to physically stop herself from reaching out to pull him back. Where are you going? The question came out more plaintive than she intended. Kale paused at the threshold, his massive frame silhouetted against the torchlight from the hallway. When he turned to look at her, his eyes were still touched with gold, and she could see the strain in his expression, the effort it was taking him to walk away. To my own chambers, he said, his voice rough. You need rest, not a newly discovered mate looming over you while you sleep. But... Lila bit her tongue, unsure what she was even asking for. She should be relieved that he was leaving. She should be grateful for the space, the time to process everything that had happened. Instead, She felt the absence of his warmth like a physical pain. "I'll be close," Kale said, as if reading her thoughts through the bond. "Just down the hall. If you need anything, you have only to call." My hearing is sharp enough to catch even a whisper. He held her gaze for a long moment, and she saw something vulnerable beneath the Alpha King's legendary composure. A longing that matched her own. A hunger that frightened them both. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, and Lila was alone with the fire and the silence, and the echo of his presence still warming her skin. She lay back against the pillows, one hand pressed to her belly, the other touching the spot on her cheek where his fingers had rested. Her wolf was still restless, prowling in circles, but there was something different about its agitation now. It wasn't trapped or desperate anymore. It was waiting. For the first time in 5 years, Lila fell asleep feeling something other than fear. She dreamed of bright flames and running through forests that smelled of pine and rain. The next 3 days passed in a haze of sleep and healing. Lila woke to find servants bringing trays of food. Real food. Rich and nourishing. More than she'd eaten in months. She woke to healers checking her pulse and her belly, speaking in hushed, respectful tones that she'd never heard directed at her before. She woke, sometimes, to the sensation of being watched, and would open her eyes to find Kale's massive form in the doorway, his expression unreadable, his presence somehow both comforting and terrifying. He never entered without her permission, never touched her without warning. Every interaction was careful, controlled, as if he was consciously trying not to spook her. It was so different from everything she'd known that Lila didn't know how to respond. On the 4th morning, she felt strong enough to sit up properly, and she found a gown laid out for her. Soft blue wool, finely made, with delicate embroidery at the cuffs. It was the most beautiful piece of clothing she'd ever touched. "The king had it made for you," the serving girl explained, her eyes bright with barely suppressed curiosity. "He has commissioned an entire wardrobe, my lady. Everything should be ready within the fortnight." My lady. Lila almost laughed. 4 days ago, she had been scrubbing floors with bleeding hands. Now servants were calling her my lady and dressing her in gowns fit for royalty. She was examining herself in the mirror, still too thin, but with color returning to her cheeks, when she heard them. Voices just outside her door. Servants, by the sound of it, lingering where they shouldn't be. "Can't believe the king is keeping her here," one whispered. "A pregnant servant from another pack? It's shameful." "Not just pregnant," another voice replied, dripping with malice. "I heard she spread her legs for some wandering wolf, got herself pupped, and then got thrown out when they found out. No better than a whore." Lila's hands curled into fists, her nails digging into her palms. She should be used to this. Had heard worse, much worse, in the Thornwood kitchens. But something about hearing it here, in this place that had started to feel almost safe, made her chest cave in. And now she thinks she can seduce the Alpha King? The first voice laughed cruelly. As if he'd want someone else's leftovers. He's probably just keeping her around for entertainment until he gets bored. The tears came before she could stop them, hot and humiliating, streaming down her cheeks. Her wolf curled up in her chest, small and wounded, and Lila pressed a hand to her mouth to muffle the sob that threatened to escape. She didn't hear the door open. She didn't hear the footsteps. But suddenly there was warmth at her back, and the scent of him, earthy and electric, like ozone before lightning strikes, and a low, dangerous growl that made the very air tremble. "Who?" Kale's voice was barely recognizable, a savage snarl that held nothing of his usual control. Spoke those words? Lila spun to find him standing just behind her, and the sight of him stole her breath. His eyes blazed pure gold, no trace of human brown remaining. His hands were clawed, the tendons in his neck standing out with barely contained fury. He looked like a wolf on the edge of shifting, ready to tear apart anyone who threatened his mate. "Kale," she started. "Don't." He held up a hand, and she saw that he was shaking, not with weakness, but with rage. "Don't try to calm me. Don't tell me it's fine. I heard what they said about you, and I—" His voice cracked, and for a moment, the legendary Alpha King looked almost young, almost vulnerable. "Who was it?" "I don't know," Lila admitted. "I couldn't see them. They were in the hallway." Kyle turned toward the door, and she could feel his intent through the bond, a murderous fury that would accept nothing less than blood. Without thinking, she reached out and grabbed his wrist. The contact sent electricity shooting up her arm, and Kale froze as if she'd struck him. "Please," she whispered. "Don't. They're just saying what everyone thinks. You can't punish everyone who—" "I can." His voice was flat. "I am the Alpha King. I can do whatever I please in my own territory." "But you shouldn't." Lila stepped closer, and some instinct made her press her palm flat against his chest, over his racing heart. "Not for me. I'm not worth—" "Don't." The word came out as a growl, and suddenly his hands were cupping her face, tilting it up so she was forced to meet his blazing golden eyes. "Don't you ever say that? Don't you ever tell me you're not worth protecting, not worth fighting for. You are my mate, Lila Wildfire. The moon goddess herself has declared your value, and I will not stand by while anyone tries to diminish you." Tears were streaming down her face now, but she couldn't look away from him. Through the bond, she could feel his sincerity like a physical force. No deception, no ulterior motive. Just pure, overwhelming protectiveness that wrapped around her like armor. Her hands tingled again, that strange warmth rising unbidden, and she pressed them against his chest as if she could absorb his heat into her own. "They're not wrong, though," she heard herself say. "I am pregnant with another wolf's child. I was a servant. I am. You are the last of the Wildfire bloodline." Kale's thumbs brushed away her tears with devastating gentleness. "You are a survivor. You are strong and brave and beautiful, and you have endured things that would have broken lesser wolves." He leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers, and she felt his breath warm against her lips. "And this child you carry, this child is innocent. This child did not choose its circumstances any more than you did. This child deserves a chance at life, at love, at family." Lila's breath caught. "What are you saying?" Kale pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, and his expression was fierce and tender and utterly serious. "I'm saying that if you'll allow it, I would claim this child as my own, raise them as my heir, give them my name and my protection." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm saying that I don't care whose blood runs in their veins, because they are part of you, and you are mine." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through Lila's entire being. No one had ever wanted her like this, had ever looked at her situation and seen anything other than shame and scandal. And here was the Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the realm, offering to claim not just her, but her unborn child. "Why?" The word came out broken. "You could have any wolf in the world. A mate without baggage, without complications. Why would you want—" Kale silenced her by dropping to his knees. The sight was so shocking that Lila actually stopped breathing. The Alpha King, the legendary, fearsome, unconquerable Alpha King, knelt at her feet. His head bowed, his hands reaching up to rest gently on her belly. "Because you are my mate," he said simply. "Because the bond does not lie. Because when I look at you, I see the other half of my soul, and I would walk through fire to keep you safe." His thumbs traced circles on her stomach, and she felt the baby flutter in response, as if recognizing his touch. Because this child will be mine, in every way that matters. I will love them as my own blood. I will protect them with my life, and I will kill anyone who suggests otherwise. Lila stared down at him, this impossible wolf, this king who knelt before a former kitchen servant as if she were the most precious thing in the world. The walls she had built around her heart, walls of distrust and fear and learned helplessness, began to crack. I don't know how to do this, she admitted, her voice small. I don't know how to be what you need. I've never been allowed to be anything other than invisible. Kale looked up at her, and his eyes had faded back to brown, warm and gentle, and full of something that made her heart stutter in her chest. Then let me teach you, he said. Let me show you what you're worth. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that you deserve every good thing in this world. He rose slowly, giving her time to step back if she wanted to. She didn't. I won't rush you, he continued, taking her hands in his much larger ones. I won't claim you until you're ready, until you want me to. But Lila. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her scarred knuckles. Please give me a chance to earn your trust. That's all I ask. Lila looked at their joined hands, his so large and strong, hers still bearing the marks of years of hard labor. She thought about everything she had lost, everything she had endured, everything she had resigned herself to never having. And she thought about the way her wolf had gone quiet and content for the first time in years, curled up in her chest like it had finally found home. Okay, she whispered. I'll try. The smile that broke across Kyle's face was like the sun emerging from storm clouds. The great hall was filled with visiting wolves. Lila had learned to recognize the signs over the past week: the increased bustle of servants, the smell of roasting meat and fresh bread, the distant sound of music and laughter. Alpha Kale held regular audiences with the other packs in his territory, maintaining alliances and resolving disputes. Usually she stayed in her chambers during these events, not yet ready to face the curious stares and whispered speculation. But today, Kale had asked her to join him. You don't have to speak to anyone, he'd assured her that morning, his hand warm on the small of her back. Just stand beside me. Let them see that you are under my protection. Lila had agreed, though her stomach churned with anxiety as she descended the stairs into the great hall. The gown she wore was deep emerald green, cut to accommodate her growing belly, and someone had woven tiny white flowers into her hair. She looked, she thought, almost respectable. The hall fell silent when she appeared. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, and Lila felt the weight of their scrutiny like a physical pressure. She could hear the whispers starting. That's her, the pregnant servant, the one they found in the snow, and her steps faltered. But then Kyle was there, appearing at her side as if summoned by her distress. He took her hand, tucking it into the crook of his elbow, and his voice rang out across the hall with commanding authority. My honored guests, I present Lila Wildfire, my fated mate. The whispers turned to gasps. Lila's cheeks burned, but she forced herself to keep her head high, leaning into Kale's solid presence beside her. The Wildfire bloodline, someone muttered. I thought they were all dead. Apparently not, Kale replied, and there was an edge to his voice that silenced any further commentary. The moon goddess has seen fit to bring the last wildfire to me. I trust no one here is foolish enough to question her wisdom. Silence. They moved through the hall, Kale nodding to various wolves, exchanging greetings that Lila barely heard through the blood rushing in her ears. She could feel the stares boring into her back, could sense the mix of curiosity and hostility and grudging respect that surrounded them. And then she heard it. Well, well. The voice was a sneering drawl, oozing contempt. The Alpha King has finally found his mate, and she's already breeding no less. How Convenient. Kale's arm turned to iron beneath Lila's hand. She looked up to find a wolf standing in their path. A tall, lean male with cold eyes and a cruel twist to his mouth. He wore fine clothes and carried himself with the arrogance of high rank. Alpha Varin, Kyle said, and his voice had gone dangerously soft. You have something to say? Only that I'm surprised, Your Majesty. Alpha Varin's gaze slid to Lila's belly, lingering with obvious disdain. I would have expected the Alpha King to be more discerning, taking another pack's leftovers as your Luna, raising some nameless wanderer's bastard as your heir. He clicked his tongue. How the mighty have fallen. The bond between Lila and Kale flared with violent fury, a rage so intense that Lila gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Beside her, she heard a growl building in Kale's throat, felt the subtle shift in his body as he prepared to move. But before either of them could react, Alpha Varin stepped closer, his lips curling into a smile. Tell me, little servant girl, he said, pitching his voice to Carrie, did you plan this all along? Spread your legs for any wolf who'd have you, hoping one would stick? Or did you just get lucky when— His words cut off with a sickening crack. Lila didn't see Kyle move. One moment the Alpha King was standing beside her, rigid with barely contained rage. The next, he was across the hall, his fist connecting with Alpha Varin's jaw with enough force to send the other wolf sprawling across the floor. Blood sprayed across the polished stone. The entire hall erupted in gasps and shouts, but Kale's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Silence. The command carried the full weight of his alpha power, and every wolf in the room went still. Even Lila felt the compulsion press against her, though as his mate, she was somewhat immune to its effects. Kale stood over the fallen alpha, his eyes blazing pure gold, his claws fully extended. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the hall. This wolf has insulted my mate, he said, each word falling like a death sentence. He has called her a whore. He has called my heir a bastard. He has questioned the wisdom of the moon goddess herself. He reached down and hauled Alpha Varin up by the throat, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. The other wolf's face was already swelling, his jaw hanging at an unnatural angle. By the laws of our kind, I could kill him where he stands. Kale's voice was perfectly calm, which somehow made it more terrifying. And I will, if I ever hear him, or anyone else, speak of my mate with anything less than complete respect. He dropped Alpha Varin, who crumpled to the floor in a heap of broken pride and bruised flesh. Let this be a lesson, Kale continued, sweeping his gaze across the assembled wolves. Lila Wildfire is my fated mate. She carries my heir. Any insult to her is treason against the crown and will be punished accordingly. He turned back to Lila, and the transformation in his expression was startling. The cold fury faded, replaced by something tender and protective. He crossed the hall to her side, removing his cloak as he walked, and draped it around her shoulders. The garment was warm from his body, saturated with his scent, and Lila found herself instinctively drawing it closer. Through the bond, she felt his concern. Are you all right? Did he scare you? I'm sorry you had to see that. And she sent back a wave of something that might have been gratitude. Come, Kyle said softly, taking her hand. You've been on your feet too long. Let me take you somewhere quieter. He led her out of the great hall, his cloak wrapped around her like armor, and Lila felt the stares of every wolf in the room following them. But this time, there was no hostility in those gazes, only wary respect. And perhaps, in some cases, something approaching fear. They didn't speak until they reached a small garden at the heart of the palace, a courtyard open to the sky, filled with winter-blooming flowers and the soft trickle of a fountain. Kale guided her to a stone bench, then knelt before her, his expression searching. I'm sorry, he said. I shouldn't have lost control like that. I should have— You broke his jaw. Lila's voice came out strange, almost wondering. He called me a whore, and you broke his jaw. He's lucky I didn't tear out his throat. Kale's eyes flashed gold again, but he took a deep breath, visibly forcing himself to calm. The things he said about you. About our child? He shook his head. I won't apologize for defending you. I would do it again. I would do worse. Lila stared at him, this fearsome king who knelt in the snow before her, and something shifted in her chest. Something cracked, and then broke, and then began to heal. No one has ever done that for me, she whispered. No one has ever. Her voice failed, and she found herself reaching for him, her hands cupping his face, as his had cupped hers that first night. He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing, and she felt his relief through the bond like a physical wave. Get used to it, he murmured, because I will spend the rest of my life ensuring that no one ever hurts you again. Lila leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his, breathing in his scent, feeling the bond between them pulse with warmth and promise. Her wolf was purring in her chest, actually purring, a sensation she'd never experienced before. I'm starting to believe you, she admitted. And when Kale's arms wrapped around her, pulling her close against his chest, she didn't flinch. She melted into him and let herself for the first time imagine a future where she might actually be happy. The garden held them in its quiet embrace for a long moment, the only sounds the gentle splash of the fountain and the distant murmur of wind through winter branches. Lila pressed her face against Kale's chest, breathing in the pine and musk scent of him, feeling his heart beat steady and strong beneath her cheek. Through the bond, warmth flowed between them like honey, warm and sweet, and achingly tender. But even as she let herself sink into his arms, some part of her remained alert. Some instinct, honed by years of survival in the Thornwood kitchens, whispered that safety was always temporary. That moments like this were borrowed, not owned. She didn't know how right she was. The footsteps that approached were measured and unhurried, the tread of someone who moved through the world with absolute certainty of their place in it. Lila felt Kale stiffen slightly, his arms tightening around her almost imperceptibly, before he released her and rose to his feet. "Uncle," he said, and his voice had shifted. Not cold, exactly, but carefully neutral in a way that made Lila's wolf prick its ears with sudden wariness. The man who stepped into the garden courtyard was tall and silver-haired, with features that echoed Kale's own, the same strong jaw, the same aristocratic nose. But where Kale's eyes held warmth beneath their intensity, this man's gaze was flat and calculating, like chips of gray ice. He wore robes of deep purple trimmed with silver thread, and around his neck hung a pendant that caught the winter light. A wolf's head, rendered in obsidian, with eyes of blood-red ruby. "Nephew." Sebastian Valewood's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach those cold eyes. "I heard there was some excitement in the Great Hall. Alpha Varen's jaw, I understand, will take several weeks to heal properly." He spoke out of turn. Kale's hand found Lila's, his fingers interlacing with hers in a gesture that felt both protective and deliberate. "He won't make that mistake again." Sebastian's gaze slid to Lila, and she felt the weight of his attention like a physical pressure. He studied her the way one might study an insect, with detached curiosity and perhaps a touch of disgust. "So this is her," he murmured, "the kitchen girl from Thornwood, the one carrying another wolf's bastard." The words were spoken mildly, almost conversationally, but Lila felt their impact like a slap. Her wolf snarled in her chest, and she had to fight the urge to step back, to make herself smaller, to disappear the way she'd learned to do in the Thornwood kitchens when the beta's attention fell on her. But Kale's hand tightened on hers, and through the bond she felt his fury, controlled but burning, a banked fire waiting to be unleashed. Her name? Kale said, his voice dangerously soft, is Lila. She is my fated mate, and the child she carries will be my heir. You would do well to remember that, Uncle. Sebastian's smile widened slightly, and something flickered in those ice-chip eyes, something that made Lila's blood run cold. Of course, he said smoothly. Forgive an old wolf his outdated ways. I meant no offense. He inclined his head toward Lila in a gesture that was technically respectful, but felt somehow mocking. I'm sure you'll make a fascinating Luna. The palace could use some fresh blood. The way he said blood made Lila's skin crawl. There was something beneath the word, some hidden meaning that she couldn't quite grasp, but that set every instinct screaming. Sebastian turned his attention back to Kael. The council meets tomorrow to discuss the Luna ceremony arrangements. I assume you'll want to expedite the proceedings, given your mate's condition. The ceremony will take place at the next full moon, Kael said, as tradition demands. Ah, yes, tradition. Sebastian's gaze flickered to Lila again, and she saw his nostrils flare slightly, as if he were scenting something on her that intrigued him. We must always honor tradition. He left as quietly as he'd arrived, his footsteps fading into the palace's depths, but the warmth had gone out of the garden, replaced by a chill that had nothing to do with winter. Who is he? Lila asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Your uncle? Kale's jaw was tight, a muscle jumping beneath his skin. Sebastian Valewood, my father's younger brother. He leads what remains of an old faction, wolves who believe in keeping bloodlines pure, who oppose any mixing of pack lineages. The purest cult, Lila breathed, and even as she said the words, ice flooded her veins. She remembered suddenly, with devastating clarity. She'd been 12 years old, hiding in a cupboard while screams echoed through her family's home. Her mother's voice, desperate, run, Lila, run, and don't look back. The smell of smoke and blood and something else, something acrid and wrong. And later, huddled in the arms of the old wolf who'd spirited her away, she'd heard the whispers. The wildfire bloodline had been targeted, hunted, massacred to the last pup, all because of a prophecy. Lila. Kyle's voice cut through the memory, his hands gripping her shoulders. Lila, look at me. You've gone white as snow. What's wrong? She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The world had tilted on its axis and she was falling. Falling. Falling into a darkness she'd spent 15 years trying to escape. He knows, her wolf whispered. He scented something. He'll find out what you are, and then… Lila. Kyle's voice was sharp now, commanding, and some part of her responded to the alpha authority in it. Her eyes focused on his face, on the concern etched in every line of his features. Tell me what's happening. Let me help you. The purest cult, she managed, her voice cracking. They're the ones who… They murdered my family, my whole bloodline, when I was a child. Kale's expression shifted, understanding and horror dawning in equal measure. Your family? The wildfires? I thought… The record said it was a territorial dispute, a war between… He broke off, shaking his head. The purists, my uncle's people, they did this. Lila nodded, unable to form words. Through the bond, she felt Kale's rage building, a towering inferno that made Alpha Varn's insult seem like nothing at all. He doesn't know, Kyle said, more to himself than to her. If he knew you were a wildfire, he would have… He stopped, his eyes going distant as he worked through something in his mind. That's why he was scenting you. Something familiar. Something he couldn't quite place. He'll figure it out, Lila whispered. He'll find out what I am, and then he won't touch you. Kale's voice was iron and stone. I swear on my life, on my throne, on the bond between us, he will never lay a hand on you. Do you understand? Lila looked into his golden eyes and saw the truth there. He meant every word. He would burn the world to protect her. But even as comfort tried to settle into her bones, doubt crept in alongside it. She had spent 15 years hiding, surviving, making herself invisible. And now, in the space of a few days, she had been thrust into the spotlight as the Alpha King's mate, a position that made her visible to every enemy he'd ever made, including the man whose people had slaughtered everyone she'd ever loved. The days that followed were a strange mixture of growing contentment and creeping dread. Lila moved through the palace in a haze, caught between the warmth of her bond with Kyle and the cold certainty that Sebastian Valewood was watching her, waiting, calculating. She caught glimpses of him at meals, always at the far end of the table, always with that measuring gaze fixed on her. He never spoke to her directly after that first meeting in the garden, but she felt his attention like a brand, like claws scraping down her spine. Worse were the whispers that began to spread through the palace. She first noticed them 3 days after the garden confrontation, when she entered the kitchens to thank the cook who had prepared her breakfast tray. The servants fell silent at her approach, and though they bowed respectfully, she caught the edge of a conversation as she left. Unnatural, they say. The child should have killed her by now if it were truly another wolf's. Heard she bewitched him. Some kind of dark magic. Purists say the old bloodlines carry curses. That's why they had to be cleansed. Lila's steps faltered. Her hand went instinctively to her belly, where her child, innocent, precious, hers, grew steadily larger. Through the bond, she felt a question from Kale, a pulse of concern, and she forced herself to keep walking, to keep breathing. It's nothing, she tried to send back, but even she knew the lie rang hollow. That night, as she sat by the fire in her chambers, a soft knock came at the door. She opened it to find one of the young kitchen maids, a girl no older than 16, with frightened eyes and trembling hands. "My lady," the girl whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "I shouldn't be here, but I had to warn you." "Warn me?" Lila's wolf rose to full alertness. "About what?" "Lord Sebastian. He's been meeting with people. Servants, guards, wolves from other packs. He's telling them things about you. Terrible things." "What kinds of things?" The girl's face crumpled. "That your child is an abomination. That you've corrupted the king with dark magic. That you're—" She hesitated, fear making her voice shake. "That you're a wildfire." The world narrowed to a single point. Lila gripped the doorframe to keep herself upright. "He knows," she breathed. "I'm sorry," the girl said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry. I tried to defend you, but they—" She broke off, shaking her head. "Be careful, my lady. Please. He's planning something. I don't know what, but—" Footsteps echoed down the corridor. The girl's eyes went wide with terror, and she fled, disappearing around a corner just as 2 of Sebastian's purple-robed followers came into view. They looked at Lila with barely concealed contempt, then swept past without a word. Lila closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her wolf was pacing, snarling, urging her to fight, flee, protect the child at all costs. But where could she run? She was in the heart of the Alpha King's palace, carrying his heir, bound to him by a mate bond that tied her soul to his. There was no running from this, no hiding. For the first time since she'd woken in Kale's bed, Lila allowed herself to feel the full weight of her terror. She was still standing there, frozen, when the door opened and Kale stepped inside. He took one look at her face and was across the room in an instant, his hands cupping her cheeks, his eyes searching hers. "What happened?" His voice was low and urgent. "I felt it through the bond, fear, real fear. Tell me." And Lila, for all her years of silence and secrecy, found that she couldn't lie to him. Not anymore. not with the bond between them blazing like a beacon, illuminating every corner of her soul. She told him everything. The kitchen maid's warning, the whispers spreading through the palace, Sebastian's knowledge of her bloodline and whatever terrible plan he was weaving. Chaol listened in silence, his expression growing darker with every word. When she finished, he pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe, but it wasn't suffocating. It was anchoring. It was safe. I should have killed him years ago, Chaol growled against her hair. When my father died and I took the throne, I should have executed every last member of the purest cult. Why didn't you? Because he's my blood. The words came out harsh, bitter. Because my father made me promise on his deathbed that I would try to reform them, to bring them back into the fold. I was naive enough to believe it was possible. Lila pulled back enough to look at his face. And now? Chaol's eyes blazed gold, and for a moment she saw the wolf beneath the man, the predator, the king, the mate who would tear apart anyone who threatened what was his. Now, he said softly, I have something worth killing for. The words should have frightened her. Perhaps, once, they would have. But the bond between them hummed with truth, with promise, with a protectiveness so fierce it took her breath away. The Luna ceremony is in 4 days, she said. Whatever he's planning will fail. Chaol's voice was absolute. I'm doubling your guard. You won't go anywhere without protection. And if Sebastian so much as looks at you wrong, Chaol. Lila placed her hands on his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath her palms. If you kill him before he acts, you'll be seen as a tyrant. His followers will become martyrs. The purist cult will grow instead of dying. His jaw tightened. Then what would you have me do? Wait until he makes his move? Risk you? Risk our child? Yes. The word came out steadier than she felt. Let him reveal himself. Let everyone see what he truly is. And then, she took a breath. Then we end him. Together. Chaol stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Wonder, perhaps. Or respect. Or love. You're braver than I gave you credit for, he murmured. I'm terrified, Lila admitted. But I've been running from these people my whole life. I hid in kitchens, made myself invisible, let them think they'd won. Her voice hardened. No more. If I'm going to be your Luna, if I'm going to raise our child in this world, then I need to face this. Face him. Chaol's hand slid around to cradle the back of her neck, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin there. Our child, he repeated softly. You said it again. Lila blinked. She hadn't even realized. But yes, the words had come naturally. Not my child. Our child. Because somewhere in the past few days she'd stopped thinking of her baby as something she had to protect alone. I meant it, she whispered. Chaol pulled her close again, and this time when he kissed her forehead, the gesture was so tender it made her eyes sting with unshed tears. Then we face him together, he said against her skin. You and I, and the pup in your belly who will one day rule these lands. We face him, and we end him. And then, his voice dropped, rough with emotion. Then I make you mine, properly and completely, and you make me yours. The mate bond flared between them, bright and hot and demanding, and Lila felt her wolf rise to meet it. For a moment the fear faded, replaced by something stronger, something that felt like hope. Yes, she breathed. I want that. I want... Crash! The sound shattered the moment, glass breaking somewhere below, followed by shouts and the thunder of running feet. Chaol was at the window in an instant, Lila a heartbeat behind him. In the courtyard below, chaos reigned. Wolves in purple robes were fighting wolves in the king's silver and black, their bodies shifting between human and beast as the battle raged. And at the center of it all, Standing still as stone amid the violence was Sebastian Valewood. His cold eyes lifted to the window where Kale and Lila stood. He smiled and mouthed a single word: tonight. Kale's roar shattered the night. The sound tore through Lila's bones, primal and terrible, and before she could draw breath, he had seized her arm and was pulling her away from the window. Glass exploded inward as a wolf in purple burst through, claws slashing for her throat, but Kale was faster, his own shift rippling through him in a wave of fur and fury as he caught the attacker mid-leap and hurled him into the far wall with a crack of breaking bones. "Stay behind me," he snarled, the words barely human through his elongated fangs. "No matter what happens. I'm not leaving you." Lila's voice came out steadier than she expected, though her heart was hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. Her hand went instinctively to her belly, to the small life growing there, and something fierce rose in her chest. Something that felt like fire. More wolves were pouring through the shattered window now, their purple robes torn away as they shifted, teeth bared and eyes gleaming with fanatical hatred. Kale met them with the devastating power of an alpha king, each swipe of his massive claws sending another enemy flying. But there were too many, and they kept coming. And somewhere in the chaos, Lila heard Sebastian's cold laughter echoing up from the courtyard below. "The Luna ceremony grounds," Kale growled between attacks. "We need to get there. My loyal wolves are gathering. They'll—" A blade flashed in the torchlight. Lila screamed a warning, but too late. A purist in human form had slipped past Kale's guard, silver dagger aimed at the Alpha King's exposed flank. Kale twisted, but the blade still scored a line of fire across his ribs, and the scent of his blood hit Lila's nose like a thunderclap. And something inside her snapped. Heat erupted through her veins, not the gentle warmth of the mate bond, not the strange tingling that had plagued her for days, but something older, something that had slumbered in her blood since the night her family died. The wildfire, her birthright, her curse. The power her mother had begged her to hide, finally refusing to stay hidden any longer. Golden flames exploded from her palms. The purist who had wounded Kale shrieked as the fire caught his robes, stumbling backward into his companions. The wolves at the window howled and retreated, their fur smoking, and for one crystalline moment the chamber was still. Lila stared at her hands, at the flames dancing between her fingers, casting shadows that flickered like memories across the walls. She had spent her entire life suppressing this power, terrified of what it meant, terrified of being discovered. But now she had something worth burning for. Lila. Kyle's voice was rough with wonder. He had shifted back to human form, blood streaming from the wound in his side, but his eyes were fixed on her with an expression that made her heart stutter. "Your power. I know." She met his gaze, and for the first time, she didn't feel afraid of what she was. "We need to end this. Together." Kyle's smile was savage and proud. He took her hand, her still burning hand, and didn't even flinch at the heat. Together. They ran. The palace was a battlefield. Wolves clashed in every corridor, silver against purple, the screams of the wounded echoing off ancient stone walls. Kale cut a path through the chaos with brutal efficiency, Lila at his side, her flames clearing the way when the fighting grew too thick. She could feel the power surging through her now, could feel her wolf rising to meet it, the two halves of herself finally merging into something whole, something dangerous, something queenly. They burst into the Luna ceremony grounds just as the moon reached its zenith. The great stone altar at the center of the amphitheater was surrounded by Sebastian's purists, their purple robes stark against the silver moonlight. And Sebastian himself stood atop the altar, arms raised as if in benediction, a crown of thorns resting on his silver hair. "Welcome, nephew," Sebastian called, his voice carrying effortlessly across the stone. I was beginning to think you wouldn't make it to your own mate's funeral. Kale's growl reverberated through the ground beneath Lila's feet. Around the edges of the amphitheater, his loyal wolves were gathering. She could see Garrett among them, his scarred face twisted with fury. Lila had learned his story over the past days. A warrior who'd lost his entire family to a purist raid a decade ago, who bore the scars of that night across his face and carried the grief of it in his unwavering loyalty to any cause that opposed Sebastian's cult. Tonight, he would finally have his vengeance, but they were held at bay by the sheer number of purists. The heat in Lila's hands was building again, stronger than ever before, and this time she didn't try to suppress it. Sebastian had planned this well, too well. Your rebellion ends tonight, Uncle. Kyle stepped forward, pulling Lila with him into the center of the amphitheater. Surrender now, and I'll make your death quick. Sebastian laughed, the sound echoing off the stone seats like the cackling of crows. My death? Oh, nephew, you've always been blind to the obvious. He gestured, and from behind the altar, two purists dragged forward a struggling figure, a kitchen maid Lila recognized, the one who had warned her about the whispers. Did you really think I didn't know about your little spy? She told me everything, about your bond, about your pathetic devotion to this. His lip curled as his gaze found Lila. This abomination. Let her go, Lila said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. Your quarrel isn't with her. My quarrel is with your entire bloodline. Sebastian descended from the altar, moving through his followers like a snake through grass. Do you know why we killed the wildfires, girl? Do you know why we hunted your family to extinction? The fire in Lila's hands flared brighter. Enlighten me. The prophecy. Sebastian's eyes gleamed with fervent light. A wildfire queen will birth wolves of unprecedented power. Wolves strong enough to unite the fractured packs. Wolves who would make creatures like me, pure-blooded, traditional, right, obsolete. He stopped a dozen feet away, close enough that she could see the madness glittering in his pale eyes. Did you think I wouldn't recognize you? You have your mother's eyes, girl. The same defiant stare she gave me the night I burned your home. My spies in Thornwood confirmed what I already suspected. The kitchen girl who flinched at fire, who never spoke of her family, who carried herself like someone used to better things. His smile was cruel. I slaughtered your parents myself, you know. Held your mother down while she screamed. Watched the light leave your father's eyes. And all the while, I searched for the daughter, the one who escaped. Lila's blood turned to ice, to fire, to something beyond either. You. The word came out as barely a whisper. You killed them. I saved the Wolf Nation from an abomination. Sebastian spread his arms wide. And tonight, I'll finish what I started. Kill the wildfire whore, claim the throne, and restore our people to their rightful purity. Enough. The word tore from Lila's throat with a force that shook the amphitheater. Amber flames erupted around her in a corona of blazing light, and she stepped forward, not back, never back again, and let the wildfire consume her fear, her grief, her years of hiding and shame and terror. I am Lila Wildfire, she declared, her voice ringing with an authority that came from somewhere deep in her blood, from generations of queens who had ruled with fire and wisdom. Last of my bloodline, mate to the Alpha King, and I am done running from you. Sebastian's smile flickered. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his features. You think your little flames can stop me? I've been preparing for this night for 20 years. Then you've had 20 years to learn nothing. Lila's wolf rose within her, no longer dormant, no longer afraid. She felt Kale's presence at her back, solid and sure, and through the bond she felt his pride, his love, his absolute faith in her. You see my power as an abomination, but it's not. It's a gift. And I choose She thrust her hands forward, and a wall of blazing flame roared to life between Sebastian and the altar, cutting him off from his reinforcements. I choose to fight for my mate and my child. Sebastian's composure shattered. With a howl of pure rage, he shifted, his human form melting away into a massive gray wolf, scarred and powerful and terrible. He lunged for Lila's throat, and time seemed to slow. She saw Kale leap to intercept, his own shift rippling through him. Saw the two alpha wolves collide in a crash of fur and fang, their bodies twisting in a dance of death. Saw Sebastian's claws rake across Kale's wounded side, tearing the gash wider, and felt her mate's pain through the bond like a knife to her own heart. Kale stumbled. Sebastian reared back, jaws gaping, ready to tear out the Alpha King's throat. And Lila hurled a spear of wildfire flame that struck Sebastian directly in the chest. The gray wolf screamed, a sound more human than animal, filled with shock and agony and disbelief. He crashed to the ground, wildfire flames licking along his fur, pinned to the stone by the sheer force of Lila's power. She hadn't known she could do that, hadn't known the fire could take shape, could become a weapon. But her ancestors had known, and their knowledge flowed through her blood like a river finally finding its way to the sea. Kyle rose, blood streaming from his wounds, and limped toward his fallen uncle. Sebastian had shifted back to human form, his chest a ruin of burned flesh, his pale eyes rolling with pain and hatred. "You murdered innocents for a prophecy you feared," Kyle growled, his voice low and terrible. "You killed her family. You tried to kill her. You tried to kill our child." "I was right," Sebastian choked, blood bubbling at his lips. "The prophecy is true. The wildfire queen will destroy us all." "No." Kale's claws extended, wickedly sharp in the moonlight. "The prophecy said she would unite us, that she would birth wolves of unprecedented power, power to bring peace, not destruction." He leaned close, and his next words were barely a whisper. "But you'll never see it, because the only thing being destroyed tonight is you." Sebastian's eyes found Lila over Kale's shoulder. For a moment, something flickered there. Regret, perhaps, or fear, or simply the dying ember of a fanatic's certainty. "You've doomed us all," he rasped. "You've doomed—" Kale's claws tore out his throat. The silence that followed was absolute. Sebastian Valewood, leader of the Purist cult, architect of the Wildfire Massacre, collapsed into the stone, his blood pooling dark beneath the silver moon. And then, chaos. The Purists broke. Some fled into the night, their faith shattered by their leader's death. Others threw themselves on the mercy of Kale's loyal wolves, begging for clemency. Still others fought to the last, dying with Sebastian's name on their lips. Through the chaos, Lila glimpsed Garrett cutting through the Purists who had held Anna captive. The scarred warrior shielded the trembling kitchen maid with his own body, guiding her to safety behind the loyal wolves' lines. Anna met Lila's eyes across the battlefield, tears streaming down her face, and mouthed 2 words: "Thank you." But Lila saw little else. Her flames had gone out, the power draining from her as suddenly as it had come. Her legs buckled, and she would have fallen if strong arms hadn't caught her. Kyle, bleeding and battered but alive, pulling her against his chest with desperate tenderness. "You did it," he breathed against her hair. I've never seen. Lila, you were magnificent." She laughed, or maybe sobbed. She couldn't tell anymore. Her hands clutched at his torn shirt, feeling his heart pound beneath her palms, and the mate bond between them blazed so bright it nearly blinded her. "Is it over?" she whispered. Kale pulled back enough to look at her face. His eyes were still gold, his wolf still close to the surface, but the rage had faded into something softer, something sacred. "The battle is over," he said. "But we're not finished yet." Lila's breath caught. What do you mean? I mean, Kyle cupped her face in his bloodied hands, infinitely gentle despite the violence of the night. I mean that I have waited my entire life for you, that the mate bond chose you for me, and you are everything I never knew I needed. And if you'll have me, completely, permanently, for the rest of our lives, then I want to make you mine, right now, tonight. Under this moon, on this ground, with the blood of our enemies still wet on the stones. His voice dropped, rough with emotion. Will you have me, Lila Wildfire? Will you be my Luna, my queen, my mate? Lila looked at him, this fierce, powerful man who had knelt before her when she was nothing, who had claimed her child as his own, who had fought at her side and believed in her power when she hadn't believed in herself. And she answered the only way she could. She tilted her neck, baring the vulnerable junction of throat and shoulder in the ancient gesture of submission and trust. Yes, she breathed. Claim me, make me yours. Kyle's growl was a sound of pure, primal satisfaction. He gathered her closer, one arm around her waist, one hand tangled in her hair, and lowered his mouth to her throat. The first press of his lips made her shiver. The scrape of his teeth made her gasp. And when his fangs finally pierced her skin, pain, sharp and sudden, blazing through her like a brand. She cried out, her hands clutching at his shoulders, and for a moment all she knew was the agony of being claimed. But then the pain transformed. It melted into heat, into pleasure so intense it stole her breath. The mate bond, which had been a shimmering thread between them, exploded into something vast and all-encompassing. She felt him, not just his presence, but his very essence, his love for her, fierce and protective and absolute. His desire, banked but burning. His joy, incandescent and pure. His promise spoken without words. I will cherish you. I will protect you. I will love you until the stars burn out and the moon falls from the sky. She felt his heartbeat synchronize with hers, felt his wolf wrap around hers like a protective shield, felt the bond settle into her bones, into her blood, into the very core of her being. She was his, but she wasn't finished. My turn, she whispered, pulling him down to her level. Kale's eyes widened. Lila, you're mine too. She pressed her lips to the junction of his neck and shoulder, tasting salt and copper and him. I want everyone to know it. I want to mark you the way you marked me. His groan was a sound of desperate longing. Do it, please. She bit. His blood flooded her mouth, rich and wild and utterly intoxicating. The bond flared again, brighter than before, and now she felt herself flowing into him, her fear and her courage, her grief and her hope, her love, her boundless and terrifying love. Mine, she breathed against his skin. Yours, he answered, his voice breaking on the word. Mate, they said together, and radiant light exploded around them. It washed over the amphitheater in waves, touching every wolf present, the loyal and the defeated, the wounded and the whole. Lila heard gasps of wonder, cries of amazement, but she couldn't look away from Kale's face, from the tears streaming down his cheeks, from the smile that transformed his harsh features into something beautiful. I felt it, he said hoarsely. I felt everything. Your childhood, your hiding, His voice cracked. Your loneliness. All those years you were alone, and I was here. And I didn't know. You know now. She kissed him softly, reverently. We have the rest of our lives. He held her then, clutching her against him as if she might disappear, and she held him back, just as fiercely. Around them, the amphitheater was slowly coming back to life, wolves tending the wounded, securing the prisoners, calling out for their king, but none of it mattered. All that mattered was this: the steady thrum of the completed bond, the warmth of his arms, the new mark on her neck, already healing into a perfect crescent of scars, the matching mark on his. We should. Kale cleared his throat. There will be ceremonies, rituals, a proper coronation for the Luna Queen. Later. Lila nestled closer into his chest. Right now, I just want to stay here. With you. His arms tightened around her. Always. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity and emotion. The purist cult was dismantled, its surviving members given a choice: renounce their beliefs and swear loyalty to the crown, or face exile into the wild territories. Most chose loyalty. The few who didn't were escorted to the borders and released, their defeat a warning to any who might follow in Sebastian's footsteps. And as for Thornwood Pack, when word reached them that the kitchen girl they'd thrown out to die was now Luna Queen, Beta Corwin had tried to flee. He hadn't gotten far. The pack's new alpha, chosen by Kale himself, had delivered him to the capital in chains to answer for his crimes against the crown. The kitchen maid who had spied for them, Anna, Lila learned her name was elevated to a position of honor in the palace household. The servants who had whispered about Lila's shameful condition were reassigned to distant outposts, and Garrett, who had fought valiantly in the battle, was named captain of the Luna Guard, a new division created specifically to protect Lila. I don't need guards, she protested to Kale on the morning of her coronation. I have fire. You have fire, he agreed, adjusting the crown of silver and moonstone that would soon rest on her head. But humor me, I've waited too long to find you to take any chances. She couldn't argue with that. The coronation was held at noon, in the same amphitheater where Sebastian had died. But the bloodstains had been scrubbed away, and in their place were garlands of white flowers, their sweet scent filling the air. Wolves from every pack in the kingdom had gathered to witness the ceremony. Hundreds upon hundreds of them, their faces turned toward the altar where Lila stood. She wore a gown of gold and white, the wildfire colors, with Kale's silver embroidered along the hem. Her hand rested on her belly, where the child, their child, grew stronger every day. And when Kale placed the crown on her head and declared her Luna Queen before the assembled packs, the cheers that erupted were deafening. They love you, Kale murmured as they turned to face their people. They see you now, the wildfire queen, reborn from the ashes. Lila smiled, tears pricking at her eyes. And the prophecy? Will be fulfilled in love, not destruction. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. Our children will unite the packs. They'll be proof that mixed bloodlines don't weaken us. They make us stronger. Through the bond, she felt his complete contentment, his certainty, his overwhelming love for her, for their unborn child, for the future they would build together. And she sent back her joy, her gratitude, her wonder at the impossible journey that had brought her here. I was thrown out to die, she thought. And instead, I found everything. Later, as the sun began to set, Kale led her to the balcony overlooking the kingdom. Below, the celebration continued, wolves in both human and animal form dancing, feasting, reveling in the peace that had been won. The mate bond hummed between them, settled and sure, a constant reminder that she was no longer alone. Are you happy? Kale asked, pulling her back against his chest. Lila leaned into him, feeling his warmth, his strength, the steady beat of his heart. She thought of the kitchen maid she had been, terrified and pregnant and convinced she was worthless. She thought of the girl who had hidden her power, her birthright, her very identity. And she thought of the woman she was now, Luna Queen, beloved mate, mother-to-be, wielder of wildfire flame. Yes, she said, and the word tasted like freedom, like joy, like home. I'm happy. Kyle pressed a kiss to the mark on her neck, sending warmth flooding through the bond. Good, because I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way. Lila turned in his arms, reaching up to touch the matching mark on his throat. Her mark. Her claim. The rest of your life? The rest of eternity. His eyes glowed gold, his wolf rising to meet hers. You're mine, Lila Wildfire, and I am yours, now and forever. She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. And as the last light of sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, she laughed against his lips, truly happy, truly loved, for the first time in her entire life. You know, she murmured, the beta who threw me out thought my pregnancy was a shame, a scandal. He said the timing was all wrong. Kale's arms tightened around her. And what do you think? Lila smiled, her hand drifting to her belly, to the life that had begun everything, the life that had led her to exile, to Kale, to this moment. I think the timing was perfect.